So I'm gonna talk about the relationship with my children's father. I think the relationship kind of started like when we were in high school, and after high school we got together, and I really truly believe I stayed in this toxic relationship because of my upbringing. Like both of my parents, my father was abusive to my mother, and my mother stayed, and so I believe that's why I stayed for so long. The relationship was bad. It was more verbal abuse and maybe mental abuse than physical. It wasn't really physical, more verbally. And it was extremely hard because I had children with him and I was staying in it for the kids. So I left at one point, then I went back because I wanted to make it work for my children. And at that moment, I learned that you can't stay in a relationship for children. Like, it just doesn't work. But I wanted it to work so bad because I love my children. I think at that moment, it wasn't so much that I loved him, it was because I wanted my children to have their father around. So I stayed, and it got worse. It got worse. I ended up having my second son, and it got worse after that. And I think that one day I just woke up and I was just honest with him, and I told him I couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't happy. My children, it was not a good example for them, especially my oldest son, who was kind of a little bit old enough to understand a little bit. And my other son, he was an infant at the time, so it was impacting my oldest son more than anything. And I just told him I couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't happy. It was a negative effect on our children. And by my surprise, he was like, okay, and he left. At that time, after that, we were co-parenting. So he would come see the kids, take the boys, spend time with them, pick them up from school, stuff like that. And I really thought we were like getting along good. It was good for the kids, you know. They were seeing both of their parents happy, but in separate homes. And at first, I can't admit that was hard, but you know, it was a good thing because it was healthy. It was a healthy co-parenting relationship. And then I was moving on with life, started dating again, and you know, moving. I'm pretty sure he was dating beforehand, before we even broke up. That's another get naked topic. So yeah, I'm thinking everything is good, and then like one day he never came back. He never came back to pick up the boys. He didn't pick my son up for school one day, and I was calling, didn't get an answer. Called his parents, his dad. His dad was like, I don't know, he's working or whatever, I don't know, whatever. He never came back. He never called. He never showed up at my son's school. Nothing. Just cold turkey stop. I think it was because maybe he felt like he was okay with us separating and co-parenting, but I don't think he could take me being with somebody else. Because one day he showed up to see the boys, and one of my friends was over, a platonic guy friend was helping me with my car. I guess he took it as that was my new, you know, guy I was dating or whatever. And I could tell because I was like, you know, I was cool about it. Excuse me. I was like, you know, the kids are in the house if you want to go see them. And he was just like, no, I'm okay. I'll come back. And he never came back. So until today, in February, it's been 2 years since he's been out of the boys' lives. No phone call, no visits, no nothing. They haven't seen their dad. And it's been extremely hard for my oldest son because from time to time he asks, and I have to kind of put on my cape and explain to him that, you know, it's nothing that you've done, because he started to feel like he did something. And I had to explain to him, it's nothing that you've done. Your dad has just chosen not to be around. Doesn't make you a bad kid. Doesn't make mommy love you any less. You know, matter of fact, it makes me want to support him even more, because now I have to stand and fill 2 roles. So, I'm still healing from that, because that was so unexpected and it was so random. You know, I never would have expected for someone to be so involved to remove themselves so easily. So, yeah, I think getting through it and how I'm healing from it is just going on with life. I mean, I can't just stop being a mother to my children. I just can't stop life altogether because their dad doesn't want to be around. So, you know, with my healing, how I've healed, or I'm healing from it, I've done counseling, you know, I've done other things to, you know, to cope, good things, you know, meditating, praying, just doing things a little different, and then being more involved with my children, more so now than ever, because I'm trying to fill that void. So, yeah, you know, that's kind of, you know, a big key point of what I'm dealing with. And I have to admit, it's kind of scary too, because I think their dad had such a impact in their lives, well, at least my oldest son, until sometime I'm afraid that he might get caught up out here eventually, because he doesn't have that male father figure around. And it's not like I have any males in my family to fill that void. So it's kind of like, what do you do? So I put him in everything. You know, I put him in sports, and, you know, I put him in stuff in school. I'm involved in a lot in school, and I make him be involved, you know, so he can be around some positive male role models. He, you know, he can pick something from any, you know, positive role, a male role model. So that's what I pretty much do. And for my youngest son as well. I mean, I'm more so focused on the oldest one, because my baby, of course, he don't remember him. So it's not as, you know, traumatic for him as it is for the oldest. So, yeah. My oldest son, he goes to counseling. Yeah, I realized that like last month. I'm like, maybe I need to put him in counseling, because I feel like since his dad has exited, he feels like he's a little insecure, like he doubts himself. And so I noticed, like, whereas he used to be this little confident little guy, and, you know, he always had his dad there rooting him on. And I guess it's different coming from me and coming from him. And so I recognized that. So I was like, you know, maybe I need to put him in counseling. I think, you know, he's been through a lot. My mother passed away suddenly, and that was like his best friend. And so that was traumatic for him. So, you know, having another person gone from his life that was rooting him on and uplifting him, you know, it's kind of like was a lot for him. So yeah, I put him in counseling as well.
So my GetNaked story is realizing that at a young age, being rejected. I was always the eyeball person. I was tall, lanky. I was trying to fit in with everyone, and they never chose me. So with doing that, later on in life, I decided to be a chameleon, try to fit in with other people, not necessarily being or doing what they actually like to do. And eventually, when I got to the age where sex was involved, I went out for people that were married. Whatever it took, that's what I did, which of course became a low self-esteem issue. I guess in my mind it was prostituting without being on the corner. So over time, The only reason why I stopped was I had some friends to actually read me and tell me that you need to stop doing this. This is not the way. This is not what you were created to do. And eventually I listened, but it took a long time for me to want myself, to be a better person, and get over rejection, because rejection is definitely a monster. It feeds, it gets victims all the time. And so, again, life and rejection and having low self-esteem, it was the worst, which caused me to be depressed a lot. I was suicidal. Anytime somebody rejected me, it was either I wanted to have sex to get over it, or I wanted to do bodily harm to myself. So what I did to stop having just illicit sex and wanting to do bodily harm to myself, I got into church. I started reading the Bible. I really started having a conversation with God about why was I doing these things? And I asked for help to stop doing them. Anytime I had an urge, I would go to Belle Isle, go to the water, and I would write in a journal. And from my journals, I started to realize that I began to heal from all the things and rejections that I did when I was a little girl. And from my journals, I wrote a book. And in those books, I talked about those pains in my words. And then I realized that there's other people that were dealing with the same thing. I'm not the only person that deals with rejection or low self-esteem. So they gave me courage to even write even more. Also, I'm really into music. So I would find music that would speak to my soul, speak to my heart, and keep my mind in a peaceful place. Then, like I said before, I have friends that are really true friends, that if they felt or saw me start going down that path again, they would call me, they would take me out, they would have a conversation with me and say, okay, what's going on with you? I feel like you are straying away. And so I had accountability partners, and so that's what helped me.
Today I would like to get naked with you guys over a disease that I've had for over the 10 years, and it's hepatitis C. Hope I don't get emotional, because it was something that really destroyed me emotionally when I first found out I had it, because I'm like this close to being a germophobic, and I was like, why me? How could I have encountered such a disease when I didn't live that type of life? I was not on drugs, I didn't sleep around, I didn't drink. I just couldn't understand how that could have happened to me. So going to the doctor, when I first was diagnosed with it, my doctor was like, don't worry about how you got it, let's focus on getting rid of it. When I encountered the disease around 2007, they had medication that was out that could possibly cure it, but couldn't cure it. So I had already felt that, okay, 20 years is the most that you could really live with it, because it causes cirrhosis of your liver. It can cause cancer of the liver. So I had made up in my mind, okay, I'm gonna be 50, 60 years old, and that's gonna be it. It was very hard for me to deal with this disease because, like I said, I felt so nasty. I felt people would just judge me, wouldn't want to be around me. I was at one time scared to even interact with my daughters, because not really knowing how I got it and how it could be spread. The hardest thing dealing with this over the last 10 years were comedians when they joke about it. It's nothing to joke about. And people feel that the most popular way of encountering this is through sex, which is not. You really need to educate yourself on it, because that's the least way of coming in contact with the disease. So, but still on that note, I was just so emotional, torn up about it. I didn't share with nobody, like I said, because I felt that they would judge me. During these past 10 years, they've come out with various medicine to cure. I was, about 3 years ago, I was in a treatment program, which did not work. It tore my body up. It caused me to have gout, to start developing gout, problems with my kidneys, so they had to pull me off the treatment. It was a treatment that you had to give yourself a shot once a week. It was a form of chemo. So it really tore my body up, which put me back in that emotional stress, thinking, okay, so now I'm not going to be able to be cured of it. So, I mean, you have no idea how something like that makes you feel. Scared to touch people, scared to be around people, scared to be in a relationship with someone. About 7 years ago, I met the love of my life, David. And at first, I didn't want to tell him, because I was like, okay, he's not going to understand. He'll probably not want to be bothered, leave, you know. I was scared to have a intimate relationship with him, because I felt that I didn't want to spread it. So once I told him, and I tell you, he was like, he understood, he understands the nature of the disease. He knows that that's the least way of contacting it is through being intimate. And he has been my support person. When I say my support person, he's been to the doctor with me, mentally there for me. He's never judged me. He's never looked at me in any other way but with loving eyes. And that's why I love him. He gets on my nerves. But I love him just because of the support that he has been for me. God put you in a place where you need to be. So I just started working, going on 2 years for Wayne County. And I've encountered my coworker, Phette, which is producing this GetNaked. And I felt that God put me in her life, and she looks at me as a help and mental friend for her, but she doesn't know how she helps me. And her kindness helps me deal with every day that I thought about this disease. And I say that because as of 2 days ago, I got good news, because I just went under another series of treatment, and the medication is called Harvani. For 12 weeks I had to take this pill, and it is no longer detected in my blood. And that was very good news for me. So I felt that God put me in her life to give me a medium to share my story, to be a help to someone, because I had no one to talk about this with. I had nobody that I felt comfortable enough to sit down and over the years to be there, to be in my head, other than David. And you need a support group. You need somebody to talk to. You need to be with somebody that's gonna lift you up when you down, because it's just unexplainable. Nobody knows how. I really can't even express how this tore me up emotionally, because I'm telling you, I was this clean freak, and I'm like, why me? He kept saying, why me, Lord? Why me? How did I get this? So I'm here to share this, to be open with it, and also this is helping me heal, because I'm able to help somebody to reach out. Anybody needs to discuss it that might not feel comfortable. You feel more comfortable talking to someone that's going through something that you're going through, and to get through it, and to let you know that there is hope. There's a cure out there for it. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel nasty like I felt, because they really don't know. It's like a silent killer. Also, people walking around every day, they don't know that they even have it, because there's no symptoms of it. They found it in me just on the, how can I say, just going to the doctor, routine check, and I was told that they don't even know how they detected it, because at first the viral was so low, and I was at a stage 0. To over the last 10 years, I got to stage 3, and it's only 4 stages in it. So I'm grateful to God for the healing, and I also pray, God, heal me of this, and not let me get to stage 4. And I'm so happy that I didn't get to stage 4, and that I feel that there is some longevity that's going to be on my life. And also that I am going to be able to share this to help somebody, to be helpful, to be mental involved with someone, to talk to them and let them know that there's people out there that's dealing with this and is being cured from this disease. So I hope I have enlightened someone. I hope that brought some hope to those that are dealing with this, and to let you know that at the end of the tunnel there is light. So one day I'm looking at the television and I see a commercial come in, and they're talking about hepatitis C, and they're talking about Harvania, a treatment that's known to cure it right now. And they mentioned the baby boomers, and I happen to be a baby boomer, and that's years from 1964 to, 1945 through 1965, and I was born in 63, so 54 years old, so I'm part of the baby boomers. And it's very common in the baby boomers, because they said that we lived kind of scarce life. We was free, and that's why it's so common in our era. But as again, I didn't live that type of life, so to be diagnosed with something like this was just so devastating to me, and just so mentally crushing. And okay.
Okay, I'm ready to get naked. Oh, y'all didn't mean real naked. Oh, thank God, because I done gained about 20 pounds, honey. But anyway, I am here to share a brief story about growing up and being raised by grandparents. Today, that's not unusual. A lot of grandparents are being parents for the second time around because their children are having children at younger ages. But when I grew up in the 70s, it was more common to be raised by your parents. See, when I was 3 years old, my mother died from a drug overdose. And my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, actually took care of me. Even in her state of addiction, my mother had enough sense, had enough love for me to go to my grandmother and tell her and ask her if something were to happen to her, would she take care of me? And I'm thankful for that, because my mother had 2 children. I have a brother whom I've not seen in more than 2 decades. I don't even know if he's still alive, but he didn't luck out as I did. He wound up with our maternal side of the family, which unfortunately was composed of a lot of addicts, both drugs and alcohol. So, I was raised by my grandparents who were already elderly in their 60s when they took on the task of raising a 3-year-old little girl. Now, what's particular about the story is that although my mother transitioned, my father was still very much alive. In the streets, pool hustler, some say a pimp, some say my mother was his bottom lady. She was top. So that is my history that I found out as I grew up because my father has other children, which is up for debate when you define children, because you ask some people and they say my oldest sister is really his only other legitimate child, whereas you ask my other siblings and all 3 will say he's their father as well. Anyway, so my father, because he was in his 30s when I was born, according to my birth certificate, was too busy to raise a little girl. He had never raised any of his children. He wasn't completely active in the lives of his children. And even though I was to be the last one, it didn't make a difference. My father did make guest appearances around birthdays and around Christmases. And those were special. But who doesn't want to spend more time with their parents when they're a kid? How do you explain that to your fellow classmates, that you're being raised in a strict Christian home, I might add, by your grandparents? As a child, I longed to be with my father. And as I got older, around about my teens, as I was a preteen, my father wound up moving in with a woman who became my stepmother, and she had 2 children. And I felt a jealousy because I realized, little by little, grapevine from my other siblings, that he was more active in their lives. I have one distinct memory as a child of wanting the Michael Jackson red leather zippered jacket. I wanted that. It was really the only thing that I ever really wanted, because I was a Michael Jackson fan. Couldn't listen to Prince, not in the Christian home, okay? So I wanted that one thing. I didn't get it. And it was okay that I didn't get it. But what hurt was that I went to visit my father with his new family, and my stepbrother had the very jacket that I wanted. It's all good though. So for a number of years, I had an issue with my father, a love-hate relationship. And I remember around about the age of 20, I went to his job up on the east side of Detroit. He worked at a factory. And they called him out. And I remember arguing and fussing at my father to the point where I stood flat-footed and I started cursing at him for his absence in my life. My grandparents died when I was a teenager, and I eventually wound up in my father's house, and that was hell. Living in a house with a woman who despised a child that came from another relationship. So yeah, 20, I stood flat-footed, and I decided that I had the right to let him know how I felt about him and how I felt about the fact that he had abandoned me during the course of my life. What mature man does that? It was not my crowning moment. It was not my proudest moment, but it was a moment of freedom. And so, over the next couple of decades, my father and I had this hit or miss type of thing like we had during my childhood. Every so often I would go visit, like, you know, I had a good relationship with my step brother and sister. And so we would go visit like the holidays, you know, Thanksgiving and Christmas, we would all gather at my father's house and play nice. And unfortunately, that has really been the state of our relationship up until the last couple of years. And I was sick. Actually, about 5 years ago, I was deathly ill and had no idea that death had come to collect. I just knew that I was in a hospital with my best friend. And I looked up, and my father walked in. And then I looked up, and my oldest sister walked in, who I had not seen in years. And something told me something is not right. But you know, God has plans. So I've had some assassination attempts. Yeah, the devil has tried. But there's no quit in me. And I have purpose. And there's a plan for my life. And so for the last couple of years, my father and I, we speak more often. We share more often. And it's funny to me, in 2017, my father sends text messages once a week to say, hey, how you doing, baby girl? I love you. Tell my grandson I love him. Remember to take your medicine. It means a lot. Our relationship isn't perfect. It doesn't have to be. And at the age of 46, I'm mature enough to understand that there was a purpose and there was a plan for my grandparents to raise me instead of my maternal family and instead of my father. God had a reason that I had to be in that house. It was the basis for my faith, my belief that Jesus is the answer. Maybe not for everyone, but Jesus works for me. And even when there are assassination attempts, when enemy tries to come for my life, I remember as a child that the blood of Jesus covers. And Jesus never leaves. And so I've learned at 46 that all men may be created equal. All men are not the same. All men do not have the same path. My father took a different one. It doesn't mean that he's a bad man. It means he's a different man. But at the end of the day, he loves me. And I love him as well. And that's all that matters. Thank you.
Okay, this is my GetNaked story. It's the story of the first time that I was molested. I was about 7 years old in the 2nd grade. And at the time I used to like to race the kids in my class and in the older kids as well. In that grade, 2nd grade, I was the fastest girl and could also beat the boys. So I started racing kids in the older classes during recess. And eventually got to the 5th grade class. And of course I could beat the girls, but I couldn't beat most of the boys for most of the school year. And then toward the end of the school year, I had gotten fast enough to beat the fastest 5th grade boy. So one day we decided to race. I beat him. The next day, at the beginning of the school day, he let me know that he wanted to have another race. So we scheduled or planned to do another race at recess that day. I raced him and about 4 other boys. We were running and I was beating the other boys, and I eventually pulled ahead of him. And somewhere in there, it went from me racing them to me realizing that they were chasing me. They chased me to the far end of the playground where nobody else was. And when they finally caught up with me, they all pinned me down and took turns. We were wearing uniforms, I'm sorry. And I had on a skirt because that was my uniform. They had on pants, but they pinned me down to the ground and all took turns sticking their hands up my skirt. When they finally stopped, because I couldn't fight them all off, I walked back to get in line with the rest of the kids because we were coming in from recess. Wasn't quite sure what to do or how to handle it, so I pulled one of the teachers aside to let her know what had happened. And she took me to class like nothing had happened and told my teacher, I won't say her name, but I remember it very vividly. So my teacher pulled us all out. She pulled me out of class and she pulled the older kids out of their class. And we had to talk about what had happened. Not once in the whole time did she ask me if I was okay. But what she did do was reprimand the boys who admitted to pulling me down to the ground, pinning me down, and molesting me. They pulled my panties aside and all that's involved in that. They admitted to doing it. What she saw fit to do was paddle them, because at the time we were still allowed to be paddled at school. She paddled them, but she paddled me as well. And she let me know that she was punishing me because I shouldn't have been outside racing with the boys in the first place. And not only did I race with the boys, but I went and raced with kids that were not in my class. So instead of me receiving help with that, I was attacked for the rest of that school year. Nothing happened to those boys besides being paddled. And I kind of shrunk within myself and stopped playing during recess. I remember telling my mom a few days after it happened, and she went to the school and she talked to the teacher and she talked to the principal, but nothing ever happened to them. And nobody ever told me it wasn't my fault. It took me becoming a grown woman with 2 daughters and a little boy of my own to realize that what happened that day was not my fault. And to also realize that when I was raped as a college student, remembering what happened or what did not happen to the boys that molested me back then kept me from fighting for justice for myself when I was raped at 19. And that's my story. I've healed from it. It took until the last couple of years when I started talking about being raped at 19 years old. For the most part, I hadn't talked about it, and I tried not to think about it, but when I look back as an adult on my past relationships, I realized that some of my behaviors are connected to some of the things that happened to me when I was younger, and not having anyone stand up for me and defend me. I've become better able to defend myself or speak up for myself. I think what triggered the healing process, ironically for me, was those women coming forward that accused Bill Cosby of rape, and watching the way the world attacked them and realizing that they didn't push it, they didn't have a voice the same way I didn't have a voice, because people knew what he was doing, but they stood up for him and not them. So that actually propelled me to start talking about my own rape and seeking healing for myself. And I think that's part of it. So this is me helping myself be more comfortable with speaking out so that other girls and women feel more comfortable speaking out.
My journey began about 4 years ago with the realization that I was going through postpartum depression. My second son is almost 5, and he was a surprise baby, and there were a lot of issues going on in my life when I got pregnant with him. My business contracts at that time as an event planner and media consultant were winding down. I was walking into another project that really wasn't going anywhere. At the time, I didn't know that, and then I found out I was pregnant. And so Affordable Care Act had not been passed yet. So I had no health insurance because I was a small business owner and was struggling. And so there was a whole issue of, okay, I gotta go back through the system again
like I had to do with my first pregnancy. In my first pregnancy, I worked for the city of Detroit at the city council as a contract staffer for a council person. And so I had gone through that process before. The first time it was rough, the second time it wasn't that bad. It was just the emotion of having to go back through that again. And listening to people tell me, you know, you have to be responsible, I'm married, this wasn't what I wanted to do. I was on birth control and still got pregnant. So I was that 1% that got pregnant. Anyway, having gone through that and having just lost my mother a year ago, having lost my husband's grandfather the same year that I got pregnant, having lost his grandmother 2 years before that, I was still in the grieving process, even though I thought I was coming out of it. And then to be hit with a surprise pregnancy and doing work that I love to do, watching it basically dry up. And about 6 months into my pregnancy, I just began to grow more and more angry and more resentful, and there were a lot of things that were going on. We had issues with, we had given away all our baby items and we had to have a baby shower and all this other stuff. And so it got to a point where it wasn't a time of celebration for me. And fast forward to having the child, I was happy, but I had sort of pushed all that anger and resentment down. I was still holding a lot of anger and resentment towards my husband, and we were going through a lot of things. I was very sick during my pregnancy with nausea for 7 months, and then I got hit with gestational diabetes for a second time. And so it was a difficult time. And fast forward from that, about 9 or 10 months, I breastfed exclusively. Once I stopped doing that, the emotions really began to hit. There were crying spells, there were anger spells, there was just, I would have these ideas that I wanted to leave. And it started, my husband had started a new job where he was working for a mental facility. And he saw this woman come in with postpartum depression, and he came home and he sat on the couch and he said, listen, I am watching you break down. I don't know what to do. He said, I know we don't have health insurance yet, but as soon as we get it, you're going to see a therapist. And I sort of looked at him with tears in my eyes and I thought, okay. And I had been to therapy before, so it wasn't anything that was unknown. But for the first time, I actually had someone that I could go and tell them, I don't want to be a mother. I don't like this. I am exhausted. I am tired. I'm angry all the time, and I don't know what to do. I just want to leave. And that honestly was my feeling. And I felt sad, ashamed, and it was difficult to tell people how I was feeling, because anytime I would share, it was always, oh, you shouldn't feel like that, or you shouldn't say that. You can feel like that, but we don't talk about that. That's something that we keep undercover. And so the few people that I would share it with would always sort of shush me or hush me or something. And I remember being in church one day and saying something to someone, and they said to me, you think you're the only person with that problem? And I thought, okay, we don't talk about this, we don't say anything. And so I just keep it bottled up. And so as my husband is literally watching me break down, even though I'm still angry at him, just because he's the person that's closest to me, that I can be angry at, I finally got an opportunity when he got health insurance, finally, through his new job. And I went to a therapist, and I literally sat in this therapist chair for 45 minutes and cried. I boo-hooed, snotted, everything. And at the end of the 45-minute session, the therapist looked at me and he said, Ms. Davis, there's nothing wrong with you. And I sort of looked at him with a side eye look like, huh? Say what? He said, you're perfectly normal. He said, you are a mother to 2 young children, a newborn, well, at the time he was a year-old, and a almost 5-year-old. He said, your life is busy. You're a wife. You are a stay-at-home mom because your business has gone down. And all the things that made you who you are, you're not doing. And he asked me a very important question. He said, what do you do for yourself? And I said, I write. I'm an author. And he said, that's work. What do you do for yourself? And I paused because I couldn't tell him what I do for myself. He said, do you take walks during the day? I live in a nice neighborhood. There's no reason why I can't take a walk. But I wouldn't do things for myself because I was constantly overwhelmed by the needs of my family. Having lost my mother in 2010, having lost my husband's grandmother in 2009, his grandfather in 2011, and my father had died in 2006. We didn't have anybody. We had no grandparents, no one to watch our kids. The usual circle of support that you have, you don't have. And throughout all of this, the one thing that I can say that helps me, even before I got to the therapist and even after, was my relationship with God. If it was not for God, I would not be here. Because when I say I had ideas, I would be in my car driving with my children, and my thought was, I can just drive into oncoming traffic and end it because I'm tired. And people with postpartum depression or depression in general, there's a dialogue that runs in your head that tells you you're not valuable, that tells you you're not worthy, that tells you you don't matter. And if you don't have something or someone that can move you out of that space, it can take you away. And despite the fact that my husband wasn't able to do it, despite the fact that my friends and family weren't able to do it, it was God. And it wasn't easy because I would read scriptures and God would talk to me through the scriptures and I still wouldn't believe it. I would pray to the point where I was just like, I don't even know what to pray for. And I would just say, God, you know what's on my heart. I need help. But it really was once I went to a therapist and the therapist told me that I was normal, that everything that I was feeling was valid, that everything that I had experienced was my experience and it was okay to be angry. I thought, wow. When he said, I have 3 kids, and he said, I love my kids, but he said, I would not want to go back to when they were little. I thought, wow. No one talks about that. We don't share that story. And motherhood is such a beautiful and wonderful and unique experience to each and every mother. However, mothers struggle. And we sort of have this storyline that says you have to be happy all the time. And it's just not the case. My sons are now 8 and 4, and I adore them and will give my life for them. However, there are some days where I literally want to choke the life out of them because they're getting on my nerves. There are some days with my husband, I have to look at him sideways and like, I have been married to you for 20 years. Why are we still having this same conversation? It's life. But I'm in a much better place now. 1, because I made myself a priority, which is one of the things that the therapist said. Every day, not one day out of the week, not a couple hours out of the week, but every day, I have to do something for myself. And I think as mothers, we typically are told that everything we do has to be about our families. You know, there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about how a woman arises before her family and it's dark and she goes to bed after everybody's still doing work. Literally from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, you're working. And for some women, that doesn't even stop when you sleep because your mind is racing. And I know that personally because there are some days where there's so much going on, my mind does not shut off. If you were to tell me your story and to tell me that some days it sucks to be a mother, I get it. And I wouldn't judge you harshly or differently for it. I would simply hug you and tell you that everything that you feel is valid. What do you do for yourself? Have you gone to therapy? Do you go to worship or something that can possibly help you get past that? I want to encourage anyone and everyone that's watching this video that if you know someone or are personally going through it yourself, it's okay. Mental health is one of the most important things that we have. If your mind is not right, nothing in your life will be right. Because at some point in time, the anger, the frustration, the irritability, the impatience, all of that will spill over into some other avenue of your life. And you'll constantly wonder why things are always going wrong or why you always react to things the way that you do. You have to make sure that your mind is right. Just like we talk about physical fitness is important for the body, mental fitness is important for our minds. I trust, hope, and pray that this will help someone, and I hope that my getting naked will help someone release their inhibitions and get naked too. Join the Get Naked movement. Thank you.